Mind. So I want to welcome everyone to this session. My name is Rehema Kabare. I am the Heat Pump Project Assistant, and I work with the Global Buildings Performance Network, GBPN, where we are working together with ROC, CLASS, and Agora to develop the heat pump toolkit and upgrading it or updating the 2.0 toolkit to 3.0. We are also having interpretation services. So if you're comfortable with English, keep listening to us. If you are comfortable with Spanish or Portuguese, that provision is available. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a world map with the interpretation written down below. So if you go right there, you'll find where to get the language that is comfortable for you. I will now introduce the first person to give us some opening remarks. His name is Dr. Richard Lowes, and I'll read his short bio. So he is a senior energy policy professional with internationally recognized expertise in heating and buildings technology and policy. He works with the Regulatory Assistance Project, RAP, where he is the team lead for work on heat, buildings, and industry. He is non-executive director at the Scottish Government's Heat and Buildings Programme Board, a fellow of the Energy Institution, and honorary lecturer at the University of Exeter. He is also the chair of the International Clean Heat Forum, part of the United Nations Environmental Programme Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction, that's Global ABC, and the vice president of the Europe-based School Heating Coalition. He has experience in utilities, academia, government, and NGOs. I will now welcome him to give a few opening remarks. Welcome.
Thanks, Rahima. Thanks for that lovely welcome, and it's a pleasure to be here. As Rahima said, I'm Richard Lowes. I'm a team lead at the Regulatory Assistance Project. The Regulatory Assistance Project, sometimes known as RAP, we're a clean NGO that works on accelerating the transition to clean energy, and we work on energy, regulation and policy primarily. So at RAP, I lead much of our work on clean heating, and that's around the world, but I also lead a lot of our collaborative work on heat pumps. And on heat pumps, we work with GBPN, so thanks to GBPN for hosting this webinar. We also work with CLASP, who are the Collaborative Labelling and Appliance Standards Programme. These are the appliance experts. And we work with energy transition think tank Agora Energiewende. So I'm delighted to open up this important conversation about heat pumps. As you may have heard from my background, I am quite a fan of heat pumps and understand their role in the energy system, I'd say, quite well. Today we're focusing on why they're important, but also why issues of equity are very important as heat pumps are rolled out. So I'll just spend a few minutes talking about the basics, really. So heat pumps aren't just another fad technology. They are a technology which is used already around the world. Often it's a sort of quiet hero in the background. And they're really a cornerstone of the journey to decarbonising heat in buildings, but also the integration of buildings into a clean energy system. They're incredibly efficient. They really are, from a performance perspective, one of the most efficient technologies you can get. And that's because for each unit of heat they generate, so each 3 units of heat they generate, sorry, and this varies a bit, they only really need 1 unit of electricity. So compared to existing electric heating technologies, they're about 300% efficient. Physicists won't like me saying that because you can't have an efficiency over 100%. But in the case of heat pumps, because all of that energy is extracted from the environment by electricity, it makes them effectively efficient at around a 300% level. And in a world where we're rapidly decarbonising the electricity system and we keep seeing these cost falls in renewables and in storage, heat pumps, because they use electricity, are increasingly economic for both cutting emissions by producing clean hot water and heating. And it's important to point out that as well as producing heating for spaces, which not all of the world needs, they're also a very efficient way of producing hot water. All of the world needs hot water for sanitation, bathing, showering, as well as cleaning things like, doing the washing up, for example. In addition to this, heat pumps can be used in reverse, and that's basically cooling. So a cooling device uses the same technology as a heat pump, and reversible heat pumps can provide both cooling and heating services. And to make them even better, they can be paired really well with solar photovoltaics. And you can use the energy produced on the roof of a house, as I've got here. I live in the UK, but we've still got a good solar radiation. You can use that to produce a hot water. So I have my heat pump working with the solar panels, and you can also use it to produce cooling. I don't have cooling because I'm in a relatively cool part of the world, but you do get a very good alignment of solar output and the need for cooling. And this integration of technologies is increasingly important. Heat pumps aren't just about carbon, though. They're also about energy security. We've seen how the world's reliance on fossil fuels, in particular gas, has led to huge shocks in terms of cost and in terms of security. Heat pumps offer a way out of this dependency. They reduce the amount of primary energy that we need in the first place because they are extracting much of the heat from the environment, be that the air for air source heat pumps or the ground. And they also reduce the need for fossil fuels in electricity generation because we need less fossil fuels in the first place, and we are increasingly able to produce cheap local electricity alongside storage. However, and this is where it gets important for today's webinar, the transition to clean heating has to be fair. Equity can never be seen as a nice to have on top of the existing policies. It's a necessity, and that's because energy costs and heating costs in particular can be a very high burden for households. And if we don't get this right, there is a chance that we make it worse, but there's a real chance that we slow it down. And it needs to be a very fast transition. And so policy's got to be designed for those that need it, whether that's through rebalancing bills to make electricity cheaper, targeting financial support at households or building owners, better consumer protection, or ensuring that renters and people in social housing aren't left behind. But we also need to be honest about challenges. As I've highlighted in my work, the deployment of heat pumps faces barriers from outdated standards in electricity networks to misinformation about other solutions like hydrogen. And we've got to tackle these head on with clear communication, proper regulation, and a commitment to evidence-based policy. So today's webinar is a chance to explore all of these issues in depth. We'll hear from experts about what's working, what's not, and what needs to change. And I encourage all of you, whether you're panelists or attendees, to engage, ask questions, and share perspectives, because this transition affects us all, and it affects us all in our homes in a way that other parts of the energy transition really don't. It's a very personal part of moving towards clean energy. So thank you very much again for being here or watching online. I'll now pass back over to Rahema at GBPN.
Richard, thanks for the lovely introduction. Just one more thing to keep in mind as we go forward. If you have any questions, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So please direct the questions there. You can make them anonymous or have a name, and if possible, direct it to a particular person as we go along. The second person to give us welcoming remarks and an introductory speech or welcome is the Executive Director of GBPN, that is Dr. Peter Graham. Peter's career in sustainable building spans all levels of the industry, from the construction site to university and from boardrooms to international negotiations. He is the Executive Director of GBPN, an international network of experts dedicated to achieving the mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions from the building sector, and an Associate Professor of Architecture at Monash University in Australia. He has more than 20 years of experience in international advocacy, research, and education in sustainable building design, construction, evaluation, and policy. Previously, he has been the technical advisor and first coordinator of UNEP's Sustainable Building and Climate Initiative, where he developed and managed many of UNEP's key research projects and publications in the building sector. In these roles, he has worked closely with the public sector, civil society, and private sectors to assess the decarbonization of buildings and implementation of sustainable and resilient buildings and construction policies and practices. I will now hand it over to Dr. Peter, who will also introduce the speakers after his introductory remarks. Welcome.
Thank you, Rahema. Thank you so much. Thank you, Richard, as well, for setting the the scene so well. Yes, as Rahema said, I'm the Executive Director of the Global Buildings Performance Network, and we have been working to try and decarbonize the building sector through policy reform since around about 2012. And in that capacity, I've been really focusing on how we can support policy reforms, particularly in the fastest urbanizing countries and geographies in the world. One of the things that we've seen very much is the increasing demand for energy for heating and cooling associated with increasing production and construction of residential buildings, and that there's been a real lack of policy in that space. Richard mentioned equity, and that's part of a key theme for our webinar today. And I just wanted to give you a quick story which kind of explains why GBPN is so happy to be involved in this global heat pump project. And that is that, you know, in many countries, we're asked to help establish new building regulations. And in both India and in Indonesia, we have been working on integrating energy efficiency into affordable housing. And in both places, we needed to establish what the energy demand profile for the different types of residential buildings were. And so part of that is, of course, monitoring the internal thermal conditions of the houses and of the buildings. And in both places, we found that, you know, the interior temperatures of these buildings was in these cases hot climates too hot, and in fact in Indonesia the interior temperature and humidity was roughly the same as the exterior temperature and humidity, no matter whether there was cooling installed or not. And so whether it's heating or cooling, that story and the evidence of how the building envelope really influences people's capacity to access heating and cooling services from equipment is so critical. And so in both cases, that's been an important data point for us to be able to establish or support the establishment of better building energy efficiency policies. And that's really part of what we're looking at in this project, is what is happening as far as the building policies are concerned. It could be driving the market for heat pumps, which as Richard's pointed out, are a real game-changing technology for heating and also for cooling. So in this particular phase of the project, we're really interested in finding out or outreach to countries who haven't been involved in the project before, and particularly emerging economies and countries in the Southern Hemisphere as well. So it's a great pleasure for me to be able to introduce our panel today. And we have an esteemed group who are covering a range of countries with diverse economies and also climates. So it's going to be very interesting to see and hear for the experience of these countries. So I'll run through quickly our panelists as you can see them on the screen now. So we have Paulette Farron. She is with the Regulatory Assistance Project, RAP, and a program coordinator and senior associate. And Paulette is going to be giving us a view from Chile. She is an international consultant and legal expert, and she specializes in energy and decarbonisation and public-private partnerships. It's going to be very interesting, Paulette, to hear what's happening in Chile. We have Chilufya Lombe from South Africa, from Solid Green Consulting. He's the director there. Chilufya is an experienced electromechanical engineer with a strong background in sustainability-focused design and compliance modelling, specializing in Green Star project management and excelling in detailed modeling of building systems to optimize energy performance. We are also joined by Professor Alberto Hernandez Neto, who will be giving us a view from Brazil. He's from the Universidade de Sao Paulo. Professor Alberto holds a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Sao Paulo, master's in mechanical engineering from the University of Sao Paulo, and a PhD in mechanical engineering also from the University of Sao Paulo. A colleague from Universidade de Sao Paulo, Dario Ibargoitia, who will be looking at perspectives from Mexico. And sharing his experience of high performance building design and commissioning processes and management. And of course, time is running, so I think, Rahema, perhaps we should start the true content of the panel this evening.
Yes,
So perhaps yeah, I'm looking at the agenda now. So are we going with Brazil first?
Yes. We shall first hear from Alberto, who's from Brazil.
Sure. Just a second. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm happy to be here. I'm honored to join such important panel as this one. I don't have to share the screens, right? Rima, you change the slide for me? Okay,
Yes, I
thank you
will.
very much. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a little bit about the Brazil heat pump market, some trends, and how we can see the opportunities here for such sort of equipment. Next slide, please. Basically, here in Brazil, the heat pump technology is more focused on water heating, especially for swimming pools, indoor swimming pools. But it's starting to have an increase of interest because, especially for the residential sector, where you see a lot of buildings that having a central water heating system to provide sanitary water for the apartments. So it started to increase the interest on such equipments because, as most of you know, Brazil is more, let's say, related to cooling applications. So here, our climate, it's more suitable for cooling applications and don't have much need for heating in the indoor ambient. So the idea here is to have more a market for heating, water heating especially. The basic obstacles that we are going to share with you is on the high cost and some limited public awareness of such equipment. And of course, there is a need for increasing the energy efficiency because of the rising of energy and needs for for more, let's say, energy efficient solutions. Next slide, please. So as you can see, the market is growing, but in a very low rate. The predictions here, we have certain setbacks, economical setbacks in the last 5 years. So we are start to growing again. So the idea for 2029 is we have an increase, or a small increase, but let's say drivers of demand because our energy costs are rising and for more sustainable buildings are more and more important. So we see that we have a very good opportunity to have this kind of market increase in the next few years, especially for the residential and some commercial buildings, especially for hospitals. Next slide, please. We have some financial support that provide us some, let's say, interested on applying such kind of technology, especially for when you are talking about energy efficiency. We have some low interest in loans that we have a law that makes like a program for acceleration of energy transition that was started on 2025. And also based on this program, we have some grants and funding programs that can, as we call green funds, that provide some basis, economical basis for the implementation of energy efficient solutions. Next slide, please. We have some standards that are establishing to incentivize the adoption of heat pumps, especially, as I said, for water heating. We have a very short history on sustainable certifications, especially LEED here in Brazil is the LEED certification is one of the most important or the most popular one, but we have also some energy efficiency label for the government. So the idea here is to this kind of, let's say, drive of looking for more sustainable and efficient buildings are more and more a concern here in Brazil. Particularly on September, the end of September this year, there is a regulatory law that it's mandatory for all new private and public buildings to have a minimum energy performance requirement. So we understand that this kind of law starts to implementation. I'm a part of this. When we can implement that, so we are developing standards to provide the basis to make this kind of energy performance requirements more and more popular. So we believe by 2027, this kind of is when this law will require that all the buildings should be having a minimum energy performance. So we understand that is a driving force that will make the heat pump market more and more interesting here in Brazil. Next slide, please. So as I said, we have energy labeling important. So this is more and more important. We have already some energy labeling for equipments, refrigerators, fridges, heat pumps, and also air conditioning. So the idea here is that we have some performance standards that set minimum requirements for that. And also we are working in some education campaigns for the consumer. So to inform the consumers about the benefits and the use of higher energy efficiency equipment. So we understand with a joint force with these laws that I just mentioned, these campaigns, we started to have, let's say, more significant movement or a more significant increase in the heat pump market in Brazil in the next few years. Next slide, please. So what are the challenges? Especially for residential buildings, the high initial costs here in Brazil, it's something that we have to deal with. Still, we import a lot of parts and some equipment, so this is still an issue that we have to address. We have a limited technical expertise. We lack of skilled professionals for implement such solutions in buildings, so we're still looking for more let's say, policies to improve the education, the technical education in our country. We have some gaps talking about infrastructure, especially when you are looking for electrical infrastructure. So the idea here is we have a lot of, some cities, of course, we have a lot of infrastructures, but if you are looking for Brazil, we are talking about a huge country with difference from the north to the south. So we have to deal with that. And there's a lot of, let's say, heterogeneity in that. And of course, as I said, the market awareness. We have still a certain, let's say, difficulty to the consumer to understand how we can provide, with using heat pumps, how to use that in a better way. Next slide, please. So we have, as I said, a lot of opportunities. We're talking about in Brazil, renewable energy is very important. So we think that the integrating and renewable energy source is crucial. So to have these heat pumps using in conjunction with the other systems or technologies. The idea is to make it more cost effective. So we are linking energy demand in a sustainable way. And of course, we are thinking about the innovation collaboration on that for efforts to overcome some challenges, especially for the cost. And as I said, on the training of technical people for implement such solutions. So I think I'm done. The next slide, please. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and here's my email if somebody else has some questions or doubts after this meeting. But thank you very much for the opportunity, and I pass to Riema to continue here our presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor. It's really interesting to see that there's some new policies in play now. I've heard that there are new standards or new regulation on energy efficiency for buildings as well. So it'd be great to hear more about that when we get our Q&A session. And And just for
Sure.
people listening in, we are going to hold questions and a Q&A session after we hear from all of our panelists today. So thank you so much. That's a great insight, and it's also interesting to hear about what's going on in, warmer climates as well. So our next panelist is Julifia Lombe from Solid Green Consulting, and is going to give us a perspective on South Africa. Floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much for the intro. So I'll be speaking on South Africa. I guess Patience or Rehema is driving for me. So if you can just go into the next slide. So I think you'll see as we continue with the discussion that there's really a lot of opportunity for scaling the sort of the use of heat pumps and improving energy efficiency in our climate, very, very similar to, I think, a lot of the other countries that we're going to speak to today. If you go to the next slide. In terms of the current status, I mean, I think from all of this, we know the really useful qualities of heat pumps and how efficient they can be and how useful they can be in terms of a decarbonization. But South Africa is no different to many emerging markets where there's a very, very low penetration of heat pumps in the market. And that is despite the fact that South Africa has a relatively mature sort of energy efficiency, green building market. Go to the next slide. So in terms of where they should be used, because I think sometimes when we have the technical discussions, it's not always really clear in our markets where exactly we need to be doing it. So in South Africa, residential hot water heating, the bulk of our energy in the residential sector goes to heating hot water. Space heating in commercial buildings is a smaller opportunity because of the climate. I think the real sort of goal or the real opportunity is in the residential market. We did a project with City of Johannesburg a number of years ago where they were looking at what are the real enablers to having a net zero carbon city, because there's a number of cities in South Africa that have signed up to the C40 challenge that say that the cities will be net zero carbon by, I think it's 2040. And residential hot water heating was literally the key element that if you could reduce the amount of power or energy that you need for residential hot water, you actually make the renewable energy powering your city a lot more of a reality. So that link between energy efficiency and the ability to make use of renewable energy is very important, and we really see it with the opportunity for heat pumps. If you go to the next slide. So in terms of regulatory policies, South Africa has got really a lot of regulations and codes that are around energy efficiency, sustainability. But I think it's important to focus on just one, which on paper is supposed to solve at least half of the problem for us. So there is a law that is called SANS 10400 XA, which is looks at energy efficiency in building. This was introduced in 2011. And it basically says that 50% of domestic hot water energy in new buildings should come from essentially non-resistive heating, because the main method of heating hot water in South Africa is resistive heating. And I'll show you an example. There's, however, limited enforcement and understanding of this regulation. And what it really tries to say is that the means by which you heat the hot water should be 50% non-resistive. And what has happened in the market is that a lot of people have focused on the source. So you'd put in a resistive heating element to heat your hot water, but then you'll say that 50% of the energy comes from solar panels, which doesn't actually impact the energy use intensity. So if this, and this is one of the things that came out of the study, that if we just enforced this law, then it would mean that a lot more people would have to actually look at different opportunities. So, we often say to our clients that, if your house is built after 2011 and it still has the normal standard heating element, then it's technically illegal. So that's in terms of how we look at ways to improve penetration within each different country. I think South Africa is in a unique position that there's already regulation that supports what we're trying to do quite well. If you go to the next slide. So in terms of market-based instruments providing financial support, a number of years ago, there was quite a lot of rebates around solar water heating, which lasted a couple of years and is no longer there. The main element at the moment that is driving adoption of more energy efficiency is green building certification. So, and the drivers for that isn't because everybody wants to save the world like most of us, but it's more because there's a lot of funding that is now available in the country. So IFC, who developed the EDGE certification tool. So I think I heard Alberto mention LEED. In a lot of African countries now and emerging markets, EDGE is a certification tool that was developed specifically for the unique conditions in emerging markets. Because it was developed by IFC, they then linked this funding called the Market Accelerator for Green Construction, or as we like to call it, magic money. And because of that, developers now, if they want access to that funding, need to get EDGE certification. And because it's providing low-cost finance and performance-based incentives for green buildings, that's the one thing that we're seeing now that is driving sort of adoption and change within the country. If you go to the next one. So in terms of the challenge, so the challenge here is very simple. And, we often, if we present to people from outside of South Africa, have to remind ourselves that the terminology here is not quite the same. So a standard hot water heater here, we call it a geyser. I think that means something else in other parts of the world. And what's quite interesting for me is that this Class B geyser is technically illegal in many countries. You actually can't put this in. But in terms of cost, and you can just see, this is an example, just a Google search, 4,800 Rand for a standard geyser, and then a heat pump being 16,000. Now, the person, if you have a new development, the person who pays the 4,800 or 16,000 doesn't benefit from the energy efficiency, right? It's the end user that does. So this is the first reason why that, even though the maths would work, if you were to do a return on investment or whatever the case is, the maths would work fantastically. It's not working for the person who has to make the initial investment, which is the developer. The developer would just see this initial cost, and the fact that it will mean that you'll have maybe a higher adoption in your residential building, or whatever the case is. If you've been building buildings for the last 20 years and all of a sudden have a line item that is 3 times the price, it becomes difficult. The other element that is that makes this a challenge is the complexity of installation. Almost anyone that you speak to that has had a bad experience with heat pumps it's an installation issue. The technology on paper it's very clear what the advantage is, but you do have a lot of people who have had bad experiences with heat pumps and therefore kind of swear off them in inverted commas. Whereas the normal Class B geysers can be, it's interchangeable who installs it. It's often electricians will install it. You don't even need a plumber. Really, any old geyser can install one. So those are the two challenges: the complexity of installation and also first cost, and because the benefits are not seen by the person who's typically paying that first cost. If you go to the next slide. Cool. So in terms of opportunities, I think it's really very clear in terms of all the various elements that heat pump technology can really tie into. It's just making the link between what is theoretically available, what is theoretically achievable, and what can happen. Because if you now go to look at solar and heat pump integration, so a lot of buildings or clients and even cities in South Africa, everybody wants to be net zero carbon and so on. So if you're reducing energy significantly, you're making it possible for you to power your building with renewable energy. There's a lot of partnerships and certifications that really promote the ability to if you are now, if your buildings are more efficient. And in South Africa, we also have municipal green building policies. So all of the 5 major cities in Johannesburg all have in South Africa all have very stringent green building requirements. You know, like technically any new building that is coming up in any of these 5 major cities has to be net zero carbon. I mean, that's a very, very lofty goal. But then we are still fighting this thing of saying that we've got very basic technology for hot water. If you go to the next slide. Cool. So in terms of the case of South Africa, I think it's really quite unique because there's very strong existing frameworks and policy that that support this. There's a lot of available financing, but then we still have this low adoption. So I think a program like this is going to be very beneficial to the market, because we're now going to be able to see that where is the place that we really need to close, because a lot of the traditional challenges are not necessarily there in our case. Great. I think that's the last slide.
Thanks so much, Chilufya. Sorry, did you want to?
No, I was going to say that I forgot to change the last slide. I'm not Peter Graham.
I was going to say, if you have any questions about South Africa, don't email me. I think we can put your contact details in this in the follow-up. But it's very interesting, the insight that you're providing from South Africa. You know, it's very interesting to see the framework of support that you've got from a policy point of view and even potentially a financial point of view. But that the old split incentive issue is there. Capacity issues for installation are there. And I think there's a question perhaps to come back to around financing, because we're finding in other countries we work, like Indonesia, there are mechanisms for providing finance for investment in more sustainable buildings and so forth, but the private sector aren't really taking them up. So there's some work to do to understand how this might be working. Fascinating. Thank you so much. We'll come back to those points again in our Q&A. So next speaker is Paulette Farron, who is from RAP and is going to give us the insights from Chile. Over to you, Paulette.
Thank you very much, Peter. Well, I would like to present now a very interesting case, and we published a report very recently on unlocking the potential of heat pumps in Chile. And well, I'll tell you our findings. Next, please. Oh, well, Chile is a really interesting case. It's a very long country, and it has very different climates along it. So it has from desert to very very, very cold regions. And it has different needs in cooling and heating, and some regions have actually both. And heating and cooling actually constitute around 35% of primary energy consumption, and they comprise around 53% of residential energy use. But for heating, firewood is still dominant around the country. So at national level, firewood use represents around 40%, but it reaches over 90% into some southern or rural areas. And this firewood use is responsible for about 85% of particulate emissions in the country. This is national, and over 90% in some, rural and southern regions. And this, of course, causes huge health costs, so around 670 million per year, and the biggest number of deaths due to particulate matters in the region. So the country is very well aware of these problems, and they have started to aim to electrify heating more. And they are aiming to reduce these particulates emissions from heating by 70% by 2050. So this is a very good stress test in several ways. Next one, please. So in terms of the market overview, Chile is not in incipient stages, but it hasn't grown at the stage that they were expecting. So the goal is for electrical heating to reach over 56% of houses and 70% of apartments by 2050. So the goal is to get this as the technology of the future for heating and cooling. And the good news is that in Chile, heat pumps are already cost competitive with pellet heaters, which is the most common technology used after firewood. And they, of course, can produce between 70 and 76 less emissions than other technologies. So the opportunity is huge here. And it has a decent market value of 100 million. And they are expecting a steady growth in the years to come due to a lot of policy and regulatory changes. And however, still, around 70% of households do not have access to heating energy, which is huge in a country considering like this. And 11% have no access to hot water. So these are, again, very good options for heat pump deployment. Next one, please. So Chile has implemented several things in place in this last decade, let's say. So the biggest policy that they have implemented, very focused on heating and cooling, is the National Heat and Cool Strategy that was implemented in 2021. And they are aiming to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 65% by 2050, achieve 80% sustainable heating and cooling. This would mean mostly electrification, and to provide it to more than 75% of access in households. They also have an energy efficiency law that establishes minimum energy performance standards, labels for HVAC systems. However, these are very limited. They also have a climate change law, which actually establishes net zero by 2050 as a legally binding obligation. And this is very refreshing in this sense. They also have very recent building code updates. This was from 2024, started implementation in this year. And they have some very particular things for bigger, like heat pumps in geothermal concessions law. And this is very recent. In this year, they approved safety standards for residential and small commercial heat pumps. This came out recently this year. So the good thing is that in terms of regulation and policies, a lot of things are in place already. However, the upfront costs are still very high, and the design choices of several programs have not been very well targeted, or the results haven't been as expected. And from the report that we did, we extracted several recommendations. I'm not going to read all of them, but we can touch on them later. Second one, please. In terms of financial support as well, Chile has provided a lot of programs, mostly focused on the central and southern regions, which tend to be the most vulnerable cities. So they, for example, had a heater replacement program that started in 2011. They had a huge goal of deployment of replacing heaters. However, the technology was not very well focused. There was a lot of problems. So 10 years after, they only achieved an 18% deployment of that change of heaters. And that was, and mostly of the ones that were adopted were pellet technologies. So there was a huge lost opportunity there. No more could be done due to financing difficulties, lack of information, and other things. They also had a Change Your Heat program that actually provided between 20-30% tariff discounts for switching towards electric heating. Also some winter heating subsidy for vulnerable families, an electricity subsidy for having a discount on electricity bills if electric heating was adopted. and other programs that included energy efficiency, thermal conditioning, household improvements, etc. And there is a very recent program that provides financial support that was done by the government and United Nations program for industrial heat pump deployment. And this was only a pilot case for the refrigeration and food sector, but Chile is implementing several things, and they're trying to tackle several aspects in order to implement or foster more electrification in heat pumps. Sorry. Thank you. There is also a lot of interesting things that were done in Chile. Chile was a precursor and at the start of the race, let's say, by implementing carbon tax and green bonds in the region. They were the first country to do it in the region. However, there are a lot of caveats there. They do have a carbon tax, but it is very low. It is only set at $5 per ton of CO2 emissions, which is way lower than the estimated social cost of carbon, which is around 32.5 or something. But the good news is that they are aware they would want to increase this by 35% by 2030. However, it's very late and not a lot has been done in this sense yet. So it might be a bit confusing. Well, not confusing, problematic. They have shifted some, well, they have evolved the composition of their carbon tax as well. They have green bonds, and very recently they started to get energy storage and capacity market. So now energy storage can participate in the capacity market. So this could be a good precursor for the last. Next one, please. However, the most pressing barriers in Chile, as in the other jurisdictions that we've seen, is the huge upfront cost. In Chile, a heat pump is over 4 times more expensive than a traditional firewood burner. This is huge. However, the overall lifetime cost of the technology is still cheaper than the other technologies. But this is information that is not shared normally with people. So they just see the upfront cost, and that's too bad. Another huge problem is grid reliability. Most of the generation of electricity and the infrastructure is focused in the northern part of the country, and the most vulnerable ones that live in the southern regions, they do not have grid reliability at all. And so this reduces the trust or the confidence into switching into electrification of heating. Let's not only heat pumps, but whatever electrification. So it's a huge cultural disdain of not wanting to willingly shift into other technologies. And there are huge regulatory gaps. Labels there's a huge room of improvement in there, please. Next one, please. And the key recommendations that we found from our report is some of them are very easy to implement or would be easy to implement, providing on-bill financing mechanisms, for example, to help with these upfront costs, since most beneficiaries would be the consumers that are most vulnerable, provide low-interest loans, as we've seen in other places, foster a differentiated regional rollout. That the country cannot have a national policy of deployment that could be that for the whole place, because the differences and the grid reliability depends on each region. So they could start focusing on a very particular regions to start the deployment, to raise performance standards and labels and requirements. And, well, of course, increasing the cost of carbon and better regulate district heating, and there could be a huge opportunity for heat pumps along with district heating. And as in the other jurisdictions, just build more communication, more skills, trust, more information, communication between entities as well. The next. And I'm not going to go through this, but if you're curious, we have very detailed list of recommendations by level of importance, time of implementation that Chile could follow. We highly invite you to read our report. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you for that. I remember, I think last time we heard from Chile, you were starting this project, and it's amazing to see how this is shaping up, and it always strikes me it's such a complex place, and it seems as though they're on the one hand you've got everything you need on paper when it comes to existing standards and frameworks to a certain extent, but also that health driver. And thinking about how that could be internalized is really something. But let's come back to those things. It seems to be also a common theme that the upfront cost and implementation capability is a universal problem. Thank you so much, Paulette. So now, staying on that side of the globe, we are going to hear a case study on Mexico from Associate Professor Diario. And I'm sorry about the way I pronounced your surname before, Ibargüengoitia. It's very difficult.
That's
but,
right, Ibargüengoitia. Thank you so much, Peter.
My pleasure, and apologies for before. But yes, please, let's hear about Mexico.
Yes. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation to talk about the status of heat pumps market in Mexico. Next slide, please. Because Mexico is a developing country and neighbors to the United States, ASHRAE standards are and American manufacturers have strong influence on Mexican heating and cooling systems. Due to the country latitude and location, due to the country latitude and location, heating requirements were not very common in the past. Heating was used primarily in the north part of the country, where winters are with lower temperatures. However, in the central region, the coast, and the south, heating was rarely used, but climate change changing that. For the temperate and warm regions of Mexico, it is now understood that in cooling system, we are removing heat from the interior spaces, and that heat can be used to heat water, utilities, swimming pools, and other applications. Next slide, please. Mexico is an interesting market in Latin America. We can think that for the HVAC market, the entire Mexican market is comparable to the market of the state of Texas in the US. However, by 2024, this market was $3 billion, being in the particular case, the heat pumps only around 28% of this amount. As I mentioned, due to the climate change and promotion of the decarbonization of the buildings, the heat pump sector is expected to grow more than 8% per year in the coming years, potentially doubling by 2033. This growth estimated driven primarily by the hotel and industrial and residential sector, especially with small split systems. Next slide, please. Mexico does have certain codes and standards, such as the Mexican Energy Conservation Code for buildings, published in 2016, and it is equivalent to the International Energy Conservation Code, and some mandatory standards that establish testing procedures for HVAC equipment's efficiency. We are far from having a regulatory framework that applies at the local level in the states and municipality. We have official Mexican standards, which the name is NOMS, that attempt to establish minimum efficiencies. These are only for main split equipments as well as self-containment equipments. These only cover to the 5-ton capacity, and the equipment efficiency only consider these tests in cooling mode. It is important to note that some air conditioning norms have specifically excluded certain types of heat pumps. For example, NOM 23 exclude water-based heat pumps from its scope. Next slide, please. Depending on the building sector, we can find some government programs to support financing, mainly indirectly, for the acquisition for more efficiency equipments, including heat pumps, but nothing is directly considered for this technology. This also, the Cooling Action Plan in Mexico, this plan promoted by Semarnat, which is the Ministry of Environment and natural resources. 6, to maximize the benefit of energy efficiency in refrigeration and air conditioning equipments, and promote the low global warming potential alternatives. Heat pumps are key to achieve these goals. Institutions like the International Institute of Electricity and Clean Energy have worked to promote technologies like geothermal heat pumps through demonstration systems. I was just commissioning to work on a specific project to replace the HVAC equipment in government laboratory building, eliminating fuel combustion for heating. Next, please. For the challenge, the massive implementation of heat pumps in Mexico, HVAC industry, face a series of interrelated challenges, covering financial, technical, regulatory, and cultural aspects. The main challenges are economic and financial barriers, the high initial cost, lack of specific incentives. Mexico has subsidies or a specific tax credit for purchase and installation of heat pumps. The current support focuses more on generic financial of energy efficiency or replacement of inefficiency air conditionings. The technicians and capacity barriers. There is a shortage of technicians and installers with specialized training in design, installation, and maintenance of advanced heat pumps. The most of the HVAC technicians focus on traditional air conditionings. And obviously, as I mentioned, Mexican official standards for energy efficiency are for equipments with the historically focus on the cooling mode. And the huge problem actually is limited electrical infrastructure. Mexico currently has a deficit in electricity generation in Mexico. Obviously, the cultural and information barriers, this type of webinars help us spread the thinking and change the perceptions. Next slide, please. The opportunities to increase the application of heat pumps in Mexico market are primarily focused on energy efficiency, the demand of sustainable solutions, and the evolution of the construction and industrial markets. Number one, positioning as an energy efficiency solution. It is really important, taking advantage of the significantly lower operation cost of the heat pumps compared to the conventional systems in Mexico. Electrical and the decarbonization buildings. Mexico has the commitment to the energy transitions, and that opened the door to replacement the combustions. The capacity building and market niches overcome technical barriers to the training and specialization. Influence of sustainable construction. Obviously, the sustainable construction market in Mexico is adopting a high-performance international certification like LEED, EDGE, and including certification in pursuit of zero carbon emissions. Next slide, please. Mexico has a great potential for growth of heat pumps technology, especially in regions where cooling is essential, so that the displacement heat can be utilized for other purposes. Significant promotion and cultural shifts are required on the part of the designer, suppliers, and end users to understand the real benefits of the heat pumps. Work is being done with the government to encourage the elimination of fossil fuel combustion in mechanical systems, especially with the implementation of carbon taxes, particularly in the industrial sector, which presents a great opportunity for the heat pump technology. Actually, the roadmap for the decarbonization of buildings in Mexico is being developed. It will be presented next month which promotes electrification and the generation of renewable energy and high efficiency technologies. Thank you so much. Next slide, please.
You're in mute, Peter.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I was just saying that there are a number of common themes which are coming through in all of the presentations here, and we have a bit of time for Q&A. Rahema, I was just checking in the Q&A box, but there doesn't seem to be any questions posted in the chat. So if I could take the liberty, perhaps, of asking a general question, perhaps to each of the panelists, and I wanted to bring Richard back in here as well. So from what I've heard across all of our presentations so far, these common barriers keep coming up. High upfront cost. We have implementation issues at a number of different levels when it comes to either the technical capability of installers, or it could even be the actual implementation of supporting policies, which I think it seems to be coming through as well. And the scale of the ambition is high, but perhaps the progress isn't matching the level of ambition right now. And so I wanted to ask you, Richard, given
I think we've lost Peter.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, yes. Richard, you can bring you back if you had any questions that you can pose to the panelists. And the room is now open to all the attendees and participants. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box. Richard?
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Rahima. I'll try and preempt Peter's question, and maybe he can pop back in once he sorts the
sorry,
connection.
yes, I got
Oh,
knocked
hi,
off
Peter.
just at the
It
wrong
was
time. Did you
the
hear what I
critical
said?
moment. No, it was just when you were about to say the critical bit of the question.
Oh dear. My question to you actually was, given all of the common barriers, we've heard these before, and I wanted to get your some of these upfront cost issues, implementation capability issues, etc.
You broke up again there, Peter, but I think I got the gist of it. So, I mean, undoubtedly, if we're talking resistive heating, which is what we were talking about in South Africa there as well, heat pumps are going to cost more upfront. There's more components, more difficult to fit, but you see this incredible running cost saving, and so you do see, costs a third of what they otherwise might be compared to electric, and probably less than kerosene or diesel heating too. There's no getting away from the fact that in many cases, particularly where you're switching from fossil fuels, heat pumps cost more upfront. And governments need to recognise that, but that's no different to any sort of energy technology, really, which is a long-term investment, whether that be a gas grid or a power station, or renewable generation. There are high capital costs associated with renewables, but low running costs, very low operational costs. And policy's got to reflect that, and it's the role of government and policymakers really to look at the long term and not the short term. And if you were to look at the short term, we'd give everyone, pure electric heating. It's very cheap to fit. You can heat hot water very easily. You can heat rooms very easily, but it's got really high running costs and the emissions aren't great. And it's the role of policymakers really to sort that issue out, to make sure that those long term costs are reflected, and long term benefits are reflected. And that means making sure that we've got markets which offer decent running costs if you switch. It means offering households that need it financial support up front for making the switch, and that could be support for it could be hot water heat pumps in some circumstances. It could be reversible heat pumps for cooling and also hot water. And it might also be support for upgrading buildings to make it all come together. And that is the role of policymakers. But fundamentally, I still think there's a first step that we need to make, which is communication. And still, I think the role of heat pumps isn't as well appreciated as it needs to be around the world. And so a big part of this challenge is educating policymakers and educating governments and educating civil society as well, actually, about how important heat pumps are for this transition. I think we haven't done, well, it's not just our job, but I think we as advocates and experts can do more to promote heat pumps and talk about those benefits, because that's the first step to then getting the policies and markets in place to make sure that the longer term costs are reflected in terms of prices and good running costs.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I want maybe picking up on that and to bring Chilufya in from South Africa. One thing that struck me about what you said was that you have a really good standard there, which is requiring 50% domestic hot water from energy efficient or renewable sources, and yet it's not, not being effectively implemented or not being enforced. And I guess while Richard's talking about policymakers' responsibility, it seems like there could be more done on the follow through from policymakers in South Africa. Would that be a fair thing to say?
Yes, yeah, definitely. I mean, that's why I said that we have a number of really good codes and laws around sustainability and energy efficiency. I mean, just the fact that every single new building is technically supposed to be net zero carbon between now and 2030. I mean, that is like there's most buildings, even in a voluntary sort of process, can't get there. So it may also be a case sometimes that some of the policy is too ambitious, which is why enforcement becomes really, really poor. So, for example, all buildings, not new buildings, all existing buildings now have to have an energy performance certificate, which means thousands of buildings have to go through this process. And the first time round that they did it, they had to extend the deadline because the uptake was so low. And technically, building owners can go to jail if they don't display an EPC in their buildings. And the new deadline is now December, and we're waiting to see whether it gets moved out because, again, adoption is low. I'm not sure what's happening with my camera because I did think it was moving forward and back, and I tried to switch it on and off, but it seems to only have the background.
It's okay. You didn't even have my voice before, so we can't complain. Yeah, I mean that is part of the you mentioned perhaps the policies are too ambitious, and yes, I think that there's two ways that we're looking at this when we talk about communication. One of them is we're communicating what we need to achieve in order to address the challenge of climate change, which means, zero emissions in the building sector from 2050 and, electrification and these sorts of things. But putting that out as a near-term target is very difficult. So somehow being able to engage with the community, engage with policymakers, and particularly the industry about what's the achievable near-term goal. And one of the things that we're working on, our approach in GBPN is to really try and find out what the first step can be that we can win with and build the momentum through achievements rather than more commitments. And on that point, actually, I wanted to ask Paulette about some of the targets that you'd mentioned in Chile as well. 50%, 56% houses electrified, 70% apartments electrified by 2050. And I looked at that map of Chile, huge long country with so many different climates and so forth. And just wondering, is there a strong sense of method in Chile for being able to achieve that? Is it going to be market-led? Is it going to be government-led? How do you see it? Or are these too ambitious, as Chilifia was saying?
Well, it started as government-led because they started all this process in the beginning of 2000s. So they started by doing a heat map and stuff like that once they were seeing all the huge costs about this. And then there is when they noticed about the need for electrification. I mean, heat pumps is not their focus, of course. They are starting by just electrification at this point. So they decided to start putting the policies in place and the market instruments and to facilitate that openness. However, more in terms of the implementation, unfortunately, there was not a lot of public information available to see how the trend is going there, or to see which goals have been reached despite this. These goals were implemented several years ago, and then they updated their compromises to get into those levels. They have updated those, so the government is really going forward with this, but there has not been yet a lot of implementation in the heat pump policy. In the heat pump side, it is very gray and unfortunately very low, because there is a lot of grayness in I mean, even getting market trends and everything, there was no information whatsoever. And this is very sad, because the government has even implemented programs for sharing information with the communities about energy, but they are very hard to find anyway. So they have been doing so much effort in so many aspects. So they have tackled the communication part, the regulatory part, but starting by the policy part, getting the country into the right sense of climate change and goals. So they have started from the tallest part of the chain, right? So from the policy side, and doing this legally binding, and they are starting in that sense. But then getting into the nitty-gritty, the implementers, I think there is where there are a lot of complications because of lack of confidence, lack of available information. There have been a lot of papers written in scientific papers doing a lot of numbers in this case as well. International collaboration with the GIZ and other organisms helping the country, but this information is not getting into the users, nor the installers, nor the investors. So I think there is the gap that hasn't helped to get the deployment as big as it could have been, despite all of these tools in place already.
It's frustrating to hear that, because we certainly do have a lot of tools, and that, again, I was just thinking about what a number of you said regarding certification schemes as well. And we heard that, for example, in Mexico, there's prevalence of LEED, and we have an EDGE program for financing. We heard that also, that certification is an important aspect in Brazil. And so I was going to ask Diario, in Mexico, you mentioned opportunities regarding focusing on energy efficiency as a solution, the sort of push for decarbonization, and mentioned the roadmap. And I guess I was thinking, is this work going on in Mexico sort of being led from the top down, from the big end of town, like with EDGE and I'd say the LEED certified buildings and so forth? They're the kind of a luxury product in some ways, and on the other hand, you've got regulations and minimum energy performance standards required for the mainstream buildings. In the roadmap that was mentioned there, what's the theory of change? Is it top-down market leaders, or are we talking about mass market interventions?
It's more math market interventions. The roadmap is developed by the Sustentabilidad para México, SUME, which is the Mexico Green Building Council.
Right.
We together with World Resource Institute Mexico, and they are promoting absolutely electrification and energy efficiency in two special states or cities, in Monterrey, in the north of the Mexico, and in Chihuahua. They promote two study case to review it. The problem is the matrix of the electrification in Mexico. We have a really small energy renewable in Mexico. The 6 past years was terrible in Mexico about the energy renewable, and now we are pushing to have it. If we move to the electrification, we have a really bad electrification or matrix. Now we are pushing to, in the hotel industry, about to change mainly in the coast of the country, because they need cooling all the year, 24 hours of the year. And this heat that we remove from the rooms, we can use it as a cooling, heating the water services. That's the main application for Mexico. LEED certification, now we have the V5 version. It's really interesting, but it's complicated in Mexico. The local standards are not promoting yet the application of energy efficiency, and that's a huge challenge in Mexico. The Green Building Council in Mexico, ASRA, Mexico City chapter, and other associations, we are pushing to have it, but it's complicated to promote, to convince the government the real benefits for use this kind of technology for heating and cooling in Mexico.
That, yeah, I'm interested in the roadmap, and in fact, I'd invite you to connect, if you haven't already, on roadmaps with Mambua and Mugure and Rehema and Patience from the GBPN Africa team, who are working on the decarbonisation roadmap for buildings for Kenya. In fact, they had a knowledge sharing between Ministry of Public Works Kenya and Ministry of Public Works in Indonesia on how to implement a roadmap and how to develop roadmaps that are implementable. And this disconnect, I think, between the mass market and the big objective is something that the implementation plan of the roadmap sort of needs to address. And that goes for deployment of heat pump technologies as much as it does trying to develop more energy efficient building technologies and designs as well. I'm going to finish where we started in terms of the discussion with Professor Alberto. You got to go first and got to hear what the other panelists had to say. Is there anything that you've picked up on from South Africa, Chile, or Mexico regarding improvement of the situation in Brazil, or things to watch out for? I get the sense that you're in a similar position when it comes to having new regulations in place that could support more uptake of heat pumps, but perhaps the implementation is yet to be seen. But yeah, have you seen anything or heard anything on the panel that resonates with the situation in Brazil?
Yeah, to start with, where I think we have similar problems, especially when you are talking about the cost of having heat pumps. Personally, I think that the main problem here in Brazil to implement heat pumps is that once we are looking for, you don't have much problems with heating for the houses, especially as I said, our main concern when we are talking about heating is for water heating for hotels, hospitals, or residences. So I think the one thing is we still have a lack of how can I say policies or stronger policies to implement energy efficient building in Brazil. We have a huge market. We are experiencing in the last 8 years, I would say, an increase of the building sector, especially for residential ones. São Paulo, to just give you an idea, in the last 7 years, we implement something about 1,255 residential buildings in São Paulo. We are talking an increase of about 200,000 people in that residence. So the residential market is increasing very rapidly here in Brazil and in São Paulo and in the major cities. So I think and what happens is the infrastructure is not working very well. So we have lacks of energy sometimes, lack of water supply and something like that. So the government, let's say, wake up and say, okay, we have to do something about it. We already have a lot of efforts to have better buildings, let's say, talking about in thermal comfort and energy efficiency, but was not mandatory. It's always something voluntary. So we believe that this law that just came on September now, 2025, it will improve at least makes a harder push to the right direction to have more energy efficient buildings. So, of course, talking about cost, we'd say that if you're looking for a life cycle analysis, heat pumps, especially for water heating in residential in hospitals, even though the heat pump systems or equipments are more expensive, and if you compare to gas heaters, for instance, which is the most common, let's say, solution that we have for water heating here in Brazil, they make it, let's say, the return of investment we're talking about 1.5 to 2 years. So it's becoming more and more attractive, even though heat pumps are more expensive, not 3 times as our colleague in NAFCAS told us, but it's expensive as well. So, but anyway, it's when you are looking for the life cycle analysis, that's another thing that's changing. People are looking for how not only the initial cost, but how it's going to be for the operation and maintenance of the system. So I just give an idea. I just did a project for a residential builder here in the downtown São Paulo that using heat pumps for water heating, they reduce the cost of heating for that building by 1/3. So they're spending something like 17,000, 18,000 reais, which is our currency, and it drops to 5,000. So it's a solution that I understand for the residential and hospital and hotels will be something interesting that we can, let's say, focus on it, because they're where they needed water heating for pools and for sanitary reasons as well. So I believe that the thing is, here in Brazil, you say you have a law, but sometimes you don't have someone who applies the law. Who applies the law is the market. So I believe that what's going to drive the use of heat pumps in Brazil will be the market, because it's going to be more effective, more efficient, and economically speaking, a better solutions for water heating. So we don't have this problems that we have in Chile, for instance, for the heating in residence for indoor heating, but we believe that we have a huge market for that for water heating. So I believe we have similar problems, of course, with the local, let's say, patterns that we have to deal with, but I believe you can have, how can I say, some similarities as well. So I learn a lot from the other colleagues, and it's very interesting to me for us. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. I think we have one question from the online participants. Dan Fulani, Umar from Nigeria, I can see that you've got a question here. Would you like to ask that to the panel? Maybe not. I can see the question in the chat here. But I think it's an opportunity for more knowledge sharing, if I'm reading that correctly. So perhaps we can get the details of that and pass that on to the participants here as well. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, and I can see, Paulette, you were responding to what was just said regarding operating costs, and I guess getting the message out of what the benefits are actually there, right? Yeah. Okay, good. We are running up to time, and I wanted to give the floor perhaps back to Rehema, and I think there's some closing comments from Kavya from GBPN. But just before I do, just wanted to say thank you to all of you for your preparation for this panel, the insights that you've shared with us. I do feel like I want to follow up with each of you. I feel like, you know, and Richard, in terms of the global toolkit and so on that's being developed out of this, I feel like this toolkit project is also evolving, and I think we're getting down to some issues which are the grassroots issues of really trying to drive heat pump deployment. And I can just see how integrated it is with the tricky aspects of building energy efficiency policy development and implementation, subnational reach and implementation, and engagement with the private sector on many levels. So, but it does seem to me, from what everybody's been saying, that we still need to do a lot more on communications, which is the point you were making to begin with, Richard. Terrific. So to close the this panel today, do we have Kavya with us, Rehema? Or not sure.
No, Kavya was not able to join, so
Okay.
I will be doing the closing remarks on her behalf.
Okay, then back to you then, Rehema, and thank you to everybody.
Thank you. So mine is very short, just to close out and to thank everyone. And I would request as I'm closing that all the hosts and speakers to have their cameras on for a quick screenshot. And thank you to all the panelists, Dario, Paulette, Chilufia, and Alberto, and to Richard and Peter for the opening remarks and taking us very well through the questions. We shall get in touch with all the participants with the next steps and what we'll be sharing beyond this. This will feed into the toolkit that will be updated. So I'm just waiting for Mogore to have her video on, which is dropped out, but I'll take a quick screenshot. And this brings us
I'm
to the
gonna
end
try
of our
and
webinar today.
go out and come back in. I'm gonna try go out and come back in. 1 second.
Okay,
Yeah.
no worries.
Chilufia's disappeared into our background, which
Yes.
wasn't the intended. It wasn't intended.
Okay,
Mm.
there we go.
He is
That
back. Great. Thanks, Chilufia. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining, and thank you for staying to the end.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye.
And we'll catch up soon. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Take care.